The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by DraftKings 2021 NFC North player previews. Team previews, going team by team, position by position, to figure out who are the best fantasy players that you want to draft this season. If you like the episode, or even if you don't, smash the like button. Either way, subscribe to Mayo Media Network, and you tell me where you think Aaron Rodgers is going to start at quarterback in week one. Is it for Green Bay? Is it for Houston? Is it for Denver? Is it for Vegas? Is it nowhere? He's just going to be sitting out. I want to know what you guys are saying about Aaron Rodgers for the 2021 season. You can also subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast for audio podcast. You hate watching on videos, want to put it in your phone and be on your way. Everything is down in the description. The newsletter is down there, as are the previous division preview shows. We've been through 5 divisions so far. We got 2 more coming next week. Then it's rankings time for the season. Plus, I have 2 huge announcements coming very soon. One is going to be very good for anyone out there who likes to customize their own data, but doesn't want to go to 18,000 different sites. Something easy to use. It's going to be great for you. You're really going to enjoy it. And if you've ever thought about getting into the fantasy football industry, or are in the fantasy football industry and just want a paid, bigger platform, do I have an opportunity for one of you, maybe even 2 of you out there? So stay tuned to all the Pat Mayo Experience and Mayo Media Network news coming out over the next 2 weeks, because you might be very, very surprised about what is happening. Joining me on the line right now, an old dear friend of the show that I have not talked to in so long, from Established, The Run, ETR, it's Mike Leone, who's doing everything about football these days.
Yeah, it's great to be on the show. It's great to talk to you again. Like you said, it's been a little while, and ETR is going great, doing a little bit of everything over there, messing with the data behind the scenes, doing some podcasts with Levitan and Silva, got the Establish the Edge podcast going. So it's absolutely a fun time of year.
Wait, you've been doing like different series too, like almost sort of like the series that I'm doing, you copycat, breaking down each of the teams, each of the players.
Yeah, I just started a series with Ben Gretsch it's a little bit of a nerdy series. It's very projections oriented, kind of like how we go through projections and like the range of outcomes for players and how to turn that into actionable information, whether it's for DFS, fantasy, prop betting, that sort of thing. So that's on the Establish the Edge podcast feed.
All right, everyone, go check out the Establish the Edge podcast feed right now, but not before you subscribe and like the video, okay? Let's start with the Packers, because that's where the most question marks are going to be. As of right now, Aaron Rodgers is their starting quarterback. They do not have a win total on the board at DraftKings Sportsbook. They do not have playoff odds on the board at DraftKings Sportsbook, because they don't want to hang a number and then Aaron Rodgers for sure plays or for sure leaves, and they're absolutely screwed. They are minus 121 to win the division, 8-1 to win the conference, 16-1 to win the Super Bowl. So at least those odds pretend like at least Aaron Rodgers is going to be the starting quarterback week 1 and play all season for the Green Bay Packers. So that's how we're going to operate. So let's start with him. Do you think that he ends up playing for Green Bay?
I do. It's, obviously a dicey situation. I have a bet with Ben Gretsch, actually, that Aaron Rodgers is the starting quarterback for Green Bay week 1. I'm a little worried he's going to weasel out and win this bet where Rodgers ends up staying with the Packers, but maybe they don't have stuff worked out by week 1. But yeah, that's my best guess right now, is that he's with the Packers.
So when you're doing early fantasy drafts and you're trying to even do projections for some of the Packers players, obviously is it creating a value that you've seen on both Rodgers, Adams, Aaron Jones, that people are just a bit hesitant with all things being equal? If Rodgers is on the same tier as, let's say, Russell Wilson in terms as a fantasy quarterback, that people are just going Wilson 100% because they don't want to have to deal with Rodgers?
So for me, I think Rodgers is kind of overrated from a fantasy perspective. They just ran so hot last year in terms of scoring and efficiency. I think, he takes a step back this year, even if he's with Green Bay, and he's not, hugely mobile at this point in his career. And there's a big range of quarterbacks there that have the passing, rushing, dual threat upside that I don't see the value there. With Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams, it gets really interesting though, because Devontae Adams with Rodgers there is the clear number 1 overall wide receiver. He's, in the mix in the middle of the first round, right after the top 5 running backs. If Rodgers is there, he's starting to slip to the middle of the second round in some drafts, the end of the second round. And at that point, I'm pulling the trigger. The first round, I'm probably there's so much risk that I think he's more dependent on Rodgers for his fantasy value than Aaron Jones. I put it that way. Just the way those two line up with Rodgers is, pass rate by the goal line. Adams catches so many of these short touchdown passes that aren't really typical of your average NFL offense. I think, he would take a big hit if Rodgers wasn't the quarterback. Whereas Aaron Jones, if Rodgers isn't the quarterback, the ceiling gets tapped because just the scoring potential of the offense is down, but they might rely on him a little bit more. He's a really efficient runner. He's a good receiver out of the backfield. So I think both guys right now, if they start to slip into the middle of round 2 or later, are good values. It's that first round where the draft capital is just so important that I'm a little hesitant. Like, you almost have to be fully assuming Rodgers is the day one starter if you're taking them there.
Well, Rodgers right now in your ESPN and Yahoo and CBS, like early drafts, he's now being drafted as quarterback number 7. That's in between Herbert and Brady. But since June 1st in high stakes leagues, he's going as quarterback number 10 in between Jalen Hurts and Matthew Stafford. So is there a buying opportunity there? Although he is overrated in fantasy, once you start getting him at pick 95, something like that. Like when I ran my projections, he still came out as quarterback number 9. So that sounds right about where he would be going. Or are you just siding with quarterbacks who possess huge rushing upside? Because I think in that range, Jalen Hurts is the guy that I want.
Yeah, I have Rodgers more like QB 13 with some risk baked in. And if he was fully healthy, it'd probably have him behind Hurts anyways, maybe more with Brady. Like, I think Brady and Rodgers are pretty comparable. So unless you're getting a really big discount, even Joe Burrow, I think the Cincinnati offense has a lot of upside. I think they're going to throw just an absolute ton, and they have the weapons to be pretty successful, even if the team isn't that good overall. I think Ryan Tannehill has some underrated upside if they throw a bit more with the addition of Julio. He's got such good weapons. They're going to put up points. He's got some rushing upside in terms of the goal line play calling. I think he ran for over 5 touchdowns last year. Like, he gets some freebies with the play fakes to Derrick Henry. So once you get past those guys, I'd probably take Rodgers, but I think they're all close enough that I'd shovel that risk off to someone else on Rodgers. And then if he fell to QB 13 or so around Stafford, that's when I'd pull the trigger.
Would Rodgers be better or worse on Denver?
I think he might be better, believe it or not. This Packers team wasn't super pass heavy last year. They were just crazy efficient. They scored a ton. And Denver, if you look at the weapons they have, obviously you lose Devontae Adams, but in terms of depth of weapons, like, that's always been the issue with Green Bay. You look at the receiving core, it's Alan Lazard and Marquez Valdes-Scantling again. They add Amari Rodgers, who's like somewhat interesting as a rookie, but Denver, you've got Jerry Jeudy, who's one of the better wide receiver prospects in the draft last season. Love him. Cortland Sutton returning from injury, who seemed like a star in the making. Even KJ Hamler is a rookie who had some success last year and I think has some big playability. And then Noah Fant at tight end. Like, this is a pretty loaded team in terms of weapons, like, all across the field. So I think that fantasy upside would be a little bit better with Denver.
So let's say that happens. Rodgers gets traded. Jordan Love is the starter for the Green Bay Packers. What does Jordan Love look like as the Packers starter?
I have no idea. All I have in my mind is the horrific training camp videos from him last year, and it's hard to push that bias to the side. I don't know if he'd be very good. I'm concerned, again, that he's not going to align with what Devontae Adams does well to the extent that Rodgers did. And what is that offense struggles if you're not relying on Devontae Adams as a 30 plus target share guy. I think he's still going to get peppered with targets, but it's not going to be as successful. And again, the depth of weapons aren't there. So I think this could be a pretty boring offense. I think Aaron Jones is so explosive and is going to get so many touches that he'll be, more or less fine. But overall, I think it's tough sledding. Jordan Love does have some rushing upside, but I don't think I'd be drafting him, even if we knew he was the starter in the top 20 quarterbacks, or even, he might even be outside the top 25 for me.
So yeah, you take Tua over Love at this point?
I would definitely take Tua over. I'm a kind of a Tua stan. I think we've been too hard on him for last year with some of the issues coming back from a pretty severe injury. And he is loaded with weapons. You just look at the weapons on Miami. versus Green Bay in terms of the receiving options. You've got Fuller, you've drafted Jalen Waddle, Devontae Parker broke out, Jasicki's, inconsistent but high upside tight end. So I actually like Tua, as an underrated upside type guy.
So would you go like Daniel Jones or Jordan Love? Because I would go Daniel Jones.
I think like this. I've got Zach Wilson, Daniel Jones, Kirk Cousins, like QBs 22 through 24. And I think I'd take Love after those guys. So maybe right around Sam Darnold, I'd probably take him.
I would probably take Sam Darnold with his new complement of weapons and you got to factor into your projections. Not being with Adam Gase anymore works for everybody.
Yeah. So yeah, even maybe right after him, I think like Derek Carr is so boring. Like, I don't think he's going to win you any leagues. And like at that point, I'd probably take a shot on Love, but you're getting really deep there, especially for a one quarterback league. That's not drafted in most one quarterback leagues.
So you keep bringing up Aaron Jones. Looking at the average draft positions of some of these Packers running backs in like the more public leagues out there, Aaron Jones is going at running back number 8. In the higher stakes leagues, again, with just the last month worth of info since June 1st, you're looking at Aaron Jones going as the 12th running back off the board. That's pick number 16. So he's fallen behind Najee Harris and Nick Chubb, Cam Akers, and Austin Eckler. Those are the guys that he is ahead of when you look at CBS and Yahoo and things like that. But then you also see like A.J. Dillon going in the top 35 of running backs. It feels like it can't be both ways on this, and maybe they do run the ball a ton, but I don't know what to do with Aaron Jones. I've never really known what to do with Aaron Jones. The move should have been just draft him and play him all the time, but I didn't do that. So I'm good with passing on him again this year, unless he becomes like a tremendous discount.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get a handle on Aaron Jones because he's an efficiency type player, and a lot of times we're fading those types of players. They haven't given him a huge workload at any point. I do think losing Jamal Williams is low-key important, where A.J. Dillon isn't your prototypical pass catcher, and Jamal Williams did get worked in like on those third downs at times, where if we can get Aaron Jones with a target share in the mid-teens, which is very possible, he did it for stretches last year, I think there's a really big upside. Even if he's like half the carries and 15% of the targets, that could look really, really good at the end of the year. So that's kind of why I'm bullish on him in the high stakes where he's drafted. So I probably have him somewhere between the more public ADP and the high stakes ADP, around running back 10 or so. Like him a little bit more than, Cam Akers in full PPR, just because I think I'm getting a bit more receiving upside, and half PPR standard scoring, I'd probably still go with Akers. And as far as A.J. Dillon goes, in the 30s, that's rich. But once you start getting in the RB 40s, you're right that they're probably both not going to hit. But the upside for Dillon, if something happens to Aaron Jones and Aaron Rodgers is there, is that this is someone that's just going to be a highly efficient runner and score a bunch of touchdowns, right? Like the touchdown upside for A.J. Dillon, I think, is much higher than a lot of the players around him.
Everything would need to break his way, so he needs to be on that tier with some of the other guys that I do like that are just going later than him. Like A.J. Dillon's going around, honestly, like both Bills running backs right now. I'd probably still rather have A.J. Dillon. Sorry about your mighty Bills, but I don't want any of their running backs, Leone. So now I'm looking at Kenyon Drake, Gus Edwards, Latavius Murray, Tony Pollard. Like, I think that's the tier that he should be in, but he's not. He's above that.
I agree with that. That's the tier he should be in. And some of those guys I even have a little bit ahead of him. I have him like RB 43-ish, maybe a little bit higher in half PPR, like, because the pass catching upside doesn't seem like it's there. But one of those players where a lot of times we're assuming he's not a pass catcher because he didn't do it in college, but he wasn't really ever asked to do it. So, maybe there's a chance he can catch some passes, but he would need the injury for Aaron Jones to really hit. So
let me ask you if these numbers sound right to you when I ran my projection. So I have Green Bay at a 40% rush rate, 34% rushing TD rate as an overall team. So that gets divvied up into, I have Aaron Jones at 61% of the carries of the team as his market share, and 12% of the target market share in the passing game. I do have him at 64% of the rushing touchdowns, and maybe that's the number that gets skewed, and maybe that's what's leading to this. But if you just run those numbers, which seem, especially the target share, like if you're thinking about upside, that certainly isn't it. Maybe I'm overestimating it a little bit, but 61% of the carries, 12% of the targets, that would make him running back 6 in my projections.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds a little rich. If he gets that, you're really, really happy. I've got him similar target share as you. I was a little conservative on the rush share. If AJ Dillon picks up a bigger role, maybe part of the reason why I'm still optimistic on AJ Dillon having some standalone value if he just runs hot on touchdowns. I have it more like 50% of the carries to Aaron Jones, and then about a third to AJ Dillon, and then the rest kind of spread out quarterback and third running backs and whatnot. So that's where I have it. But I really think the target share has the upside to get into the mid-teens, which is part of the reason why I'm still drafting him like RB10 or so. Because if that hits.
Yeah, if everything comes to fruition, he could have major upside for a guy that's falling down the board. I just readjusted his rushing share to 50% and his TDs on the ground to 50% of the team. That knocks him all the way down to running back 11.
Yeah, I think it's running back 11 with some upside. So, to be right bordering on the top 5. I know we had some conversations before the whole Rodgers stuff about like Aaron Jones versus Alvin Kamara, and I was on the Kamara side, but it was at least a debate in the ETR projection circles. So the upside's there. The concern too with Rodgers is the volume's going to be okay, but again, he's an efficiency dependent player. If teams don't have to worry about the Rodgers to Devontae Adams connection, what does that do to him? Because I've got him at like 5 yards per carry, which is like that's high for a running back expectation. I think it's very reasonable. He's been above that, but if you've got Jordan Love at quarterback, not Aaron Rodgers, and you're drafting someone assuming 5 yards per carry, there is some room to be disappointed there.
Let's move to receivers. Devontae Adams is going to be wide receiver number 1. As long as Aaron Rodgers is tethered to that team, you're going to see a 30+% market share, which is insane. And it's just going to continue. Plus, his red zone usage cannot be overlooked. And I feel like every single year people make the case that, he just can't catch this many red zone touchdowns. The touchdowns have to regress, but that's just a part of their offense, is using Devontae Adams near the goal line.
And again, this is why I think he's more susceptible if something happened to Rodgers, because those aren't normal goal line plays for an average team. And if he was on another team, you might agree that the regression gods would come and get him and zap his touchdowns for this year. But as long as Aaron Rodgers is behind center, we know how he calls plays by the goal. Like those are very intentional, deliberate plays. They aren't fluky red zone touchdowns. So I'm with you. I mean, he's got the potential to see 200 targets, in a 17 game season. Like it's out of control. And the touchdown upside, like he can score a touchdown a game. This is why it's tough if you're drafting high stakes right now, or even casual leagues. Devontae Adams, that 1-2 turn, I haven't been drafting him quite that early at the 1-2 turn. I've been waiting for him to slip a little bit more, when I draft like middle of 2, grabbing him on the way back. But I mean, he's got absurd upside. Like he can, after McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook, I think if you knew Aaron Rodgers was healthy and you didn't want to build a running back to start, you could make the case for him as high as 3 overall. I don't think personally I'd do that, but like he has that type of profile if you're a wide receiver early drafter.
His biggest comparables right now in high stakes drafts the last month, he's going on average pick number 14. Diggs is going number 15. Is Diggs just safer knowing what we know right now, or does the upside still just lean so much towards Adams if everything breaks right, that all things being equal, let's say that they're even, and then the upside rests with Adams?
Yeah, the Diggs is safer. I think Diggs is safer. This is an offense that just threw so much that maybe doesn't quite have the target share upside of Adams, but he's still got a really high target share, around 30% he can get to with a team that just throwing a ton. They're throwing way more than Green Bay. So I'm probably taking Diggs, Tyreek Hill over Devontae Adams. And then that's where it gets, I'm because I think Aaron Rodgers is going to start week 1, I'm taking the risk on Adams likely after that. But like DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, AJ Brown are probably close-ish. And then after that, there's nobody I would for sure take over Adams after those kind of cluster of players.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Unless, I guess we won't know what's going on in New Orleans, but this feels like a spot for a Michael Thomas, just huge rebound season.
Yeah, he's growing on me. I was surprised looking at at one of the sports books had, the projected spread and line for every week of the season. And we sort of averaged those out. And I mean, that's not super reliable, but it gives you some idea of how the books are expecting offenses to run and teams to perform. And my initial scoring expectation for New Orleans without Drew Brees was a lot lower than that average team total across the season. So adjusting for that a little bit, I get Michael Thomas in that DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson type tier. He's really tough to project too, because the range of outcomes on his target share with a new quarterback, like he could be a huge target share guy, but does he catch 75% of his targets like he did with Drew Brees? Probably not. So I can see both sides of the coin with Michael Thomas.
Yeah, I have him at around a 27% share and a 75% catch rate. And maybe that's just too high. That's being too bullish on him.
I think that's very reasonable on the target share, though. Like maybe the catch rate's a little high, but honestly, I think I'm pretty close with you on that one. And I have him like wide receiver 10 or so. Like I said, like right in the, I'm taking like Metcalf and Jefferson just because I kind of like siding with the youth and some like huge breakout players. But when you get into full PPR leagues, it's like those guys are efficiency players, and Michael Thomas can outcatch them by so much that it does become, a conversation.
Michael Thomas, born in 1993. He's an old man to you now. He's no longer a young gun.
Adam Levitan has ruined me with his peppering me with his age model bias for a year. He got into me. I'm afraid to project anyone who's not, sub 25 for any sort of growth.
28 years old and he's old. How does that make you feel?
It's not going well. 34. Oh my goodness.
I got you by even more than that. So that's not great. Bob Tunyon. I don't know what to make of him because, we should probably talk about the rest of the receivers before we get into tight ends. So you mentioned Amari Rodgers, Alan Lazard, the Lazard Queen. He is still there. We have Valdez Scantling, who's going to catch 3 80-yard touchdowns this year, and that's probably going to be it. Devin Funchess is probably going to be a receiver / tight end on this team outside of Lazard. And even that would have to be late. Do you want any of these guys?
First of all, Lazard, I know you said outside of Lazard, but he's free right now in a lot of drafts at the very end. And I think at that point, he's worth taking. I think he'd clearly be drafted if we knew Rodgers was the quarterback. Amari Rodgers, I'm not a huge prospect guy, but from what I hear on Amari Rodgers is people think he's like a pretty good fit with Aaron Rodgers, where he can do a lot of, some of the Randall Cobb stuff, some of the short area stuff. So I'm somewhat interested in him and rookies in general. I know Pat Kerrane for NBC Sports Edge just wrote a really good article on rookie wide receivers and how they've been very profitable investments in general, because you get to the point of the draft where there's just more uncertainty with the rookie wide receivers. And if they don't pan out, these are picks that probably aren't working out, or you're dropping a lot of the times anyways. But if they do work out, sometimes they can hit in a really big way, in a way we can't really foresee before the season. I don't know if Amari Rodgers quite has that upside because he's just never going to see like a ton of targets with Devontae Adams there. But I do think he could be the right type of player to play with Aaron Rodgers.
Let's move to tight end then. Robert Tunyon is there, coming off a pretty good season, a very useful season when you picked him up off the waiver wire. He's going to have games where he essentially scores 0 points, but that's not that different than outside of 5 that's just your run-of-the-mill tight end. And I guess his touchdown upside is high enough that you can kind of get away with it. He's going as tight end number 11 in high-stakes leagues. Pick like number 123 or something like that. He's one of those back-end guys that you can fill out your tight end slot with, but he's not someone I'm actively going to pursue.
Yeah, same. I really, in my early best ball leagues, and I've done a couple high-stakes slow drafts that are just managed leagues, I haven't been in very many spots in the draft where I've even really considered him, so I think tight end 11's pretty rich. And sometimes people are taking these mid-tier tight ends a little too early anyways, where once you get past a certain group of guys, the floor on all these guys is so low that I don't know if I want to take the TE 11, 4 or 5 rounds ahead of the TE 18 or whatever. So but you really need Rodgers here because this is a guy who's making his way via touchdowns, right? I mean, 11 touchdowns last year. I do like that scoring upside and what it can do for you, but you absolutely need Rodgers here. And even if Rodgers is here, then you're talking about like breaking even at that ADP. You're not even really smashing it or providing much room for profit.
Yeah, if he was a last round pick, I think that would make more sense because that's that's sort of the tier that I have him in, because I will not draft a mid-tier tight end. I just do not think it's worth it. What we had, like one successful one over the past 10 years, and that was like Waller last year, and he was still going in like the 5th round. But most of these guys that you take, when you take Evan Ingram every year in the 6th, turns out it doesn't work out all that well. So I don't see a huge distinction. I mean, the upside with touchdowns and scoring with Rodgers is one thing, and you might be able to profit really well as a 15th, 16th round pick, depending on where you're going. But I don't think that's all that different than Gesicki, Irv Smith, Ferkser, Evan Ingram now, Jonnu, Cole Kmet, like all of these guys, Blake Jarwin, they're all kind of the same guy.
He's fancy Anthony Ferkser, right? I mean, he's going to get there on efficiency. He's going to have, a low teens target share. So it's like, okay. But at the end of the day, you're just hoping he's a highly efficient player. And that's Anthony Ferkser. Like, you can get him way later than you can get Tunyon.
Let's talk Vikings. Their win total is 9 to make the playoffs. They are plus 123. So you'd have to wager $100 to win $123. To win the division, plus 225 to win the conference, 18-1, Super Bowl, 40-1. Just off the hop with this Vikings team, if they can improve their defense, which it looks like they may have done, it seems like some of these odds are kind of long for them, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would be really surprised if the defense was in worse shape than it was last year. And yeah, 40-1 seems a little bit long. I don't know if I want to bet on Kirk Cousins in the playoffs getting it done, but maybe the win total there looks good. I do think that the Bears could be a little bit better than people think, depending on when they make the switch to Justin Fields. But I guess, you've got some upside in, if Aaron Rodgers isn't there with Green Bay, you've got some upside winning those games. And then you've got kind of the freebie games against Detroit. So it does seem a little bit low.
Kirk Cousins is essentially free in drafts right now. And he's probably not someone that you want to use as in a 1-quarterback league, but it feels like there is substantial upside for passing touchdowns, that you'd be kind of banking on him having one of these spike years where Dalvin ends up catching like 6 of them, and Jefferson and Thielen go absolutely off. Irv Smith or even Conklin become bigger parts of the cog. And then Cousins is a viable fantasy quarterback. But in like your mind, he's not draftable, I'm guessing, in a 1-quarterback league. He isn't to me. But he'd be a good spot start guy. He's a good stackable guy on DraftKings kind of guy.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you're not taking a quarterback that doesn't have that really high in upside in 1-quarterback leagues. Like, you're probably taking a chance on one of the rookies or something at that point, if you're going that late, or you're streaming in 1-quarterback leagues. But if you're playing DraftKings best ball, this is a pretty stackable team because it's like 4 guys, it's Dalvin, Thielen, Jefferson, and then Irv Smith at tight end, and a stack's pretty achievable. And then you're just at that point, maybe if you're overdrafting Cousins individual upside a little bit, but you're just hoping for the spike weeks from the offense. Like, if that defense doesn't improve like we think it will, there's going to be some weeks in a negative game script where they just throw a ton. And that's when Cousins hits his upside. When you're talking like 350 and 3, there was a game last year, I forgot which opponent it was, but they won that triple stack, won DFS tournaments, Thielen, Jefferson, because all those guys can get there. And that's the beauty of a concentrated offense for fantasy.
It reminds me a lot fantasy wise of the old Broncos teams with Demaryius and Sanders, or the old Oakland teams with Crabtree and Cooper, where you didn't really want the quarter. I mean, you could use Peyton Manning one of those years, but when it comes to like Derek Carr or even the backups that ended up coming in after Manning, where the target share was so concentrated on 2 players that despite the fact that you would want both those receivers, you didn't want the quarterback associated with that team, which is just really hard for a lot of people to unwrap in their mind. Because I was talking about Cincinnati with Meanie on yesterday's show, and like in my mind, Burrow is a fringe QB1, like a top 12 guy, and all 3 of the receivers could be top 30 this year. Now, if one of them ends up wide receiver number 5, probably all 3 of them wouldn't end up inside the top 30. But the way that I had them projected out between Boyd, Higgins, and Chase, like it'd be like wide receiver number 19, wide receiver number 25, wide receiver number 27 kind of thing, with just the amount that I think that they're going to throw. So it's sort of an inverse situation here where you just have these 2 guys, but that makes it so predictable at the same time. I actually think that Thielen, when we talk about wide receivers, is one of the better values going right now.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about concentrated offenses too, to what you're saying. Carolina last year, right? I mean, Teddy threw 15 touchdowns and they had 3 receivers that were top 24 or so. So, yeah, this is even more concentrated with Thielen and Jefferson. And Thielen's someone I've had a tough time wrapping my head around. Again, age model bias here, Mayo, where in my heart, like, I don't want to draft Thielen. There's other guys out there that are flashier and more exciting, but it's the sort of thing where I've done my projections and I've been conservative because of the age on his target share. I give guys like upside cases too that I weigh. I've been really conservative on his upside case, like not being that much higher than his base case. And I'm doing all these conservative things and I still have him ranked ahead of ADP, which at a certain point, you just have to say, okay, like, you got to trust the math a little bit here. We don't want to go overboard. We don't want to be overly precise, but this offense is too concentrated. And Thielen, I mean, if you look at his touchdowns the last few seasons, like, he's a very high TD rate guy. The offense is going to be decent. I think those opportunities are still going to be there for him, even if he regresses. His TD rate is going to regress from last year, but I still think he's going to be one of the better receivers in TD rate in the league. And in these concentrated offenses too, there's always, what if Justin Jefferson gets hurt? Like, sometimes we look at the chaos at running back, but chaos can happen to all the positions. And then Thielen goes from a low to mid 20s target share guy to a 30+% target share guy. So I do think around wide receiver 20 or so, Thielen, he's a value, even if it doesn't feel great. He's definitely a value.
Yeah, pick number, let's see here, 56 right now in high stakes drafts, wide receiver number 22. And, like, you can see what people are doing. Like, they're taking Jamar Chase over him, DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson. I get the target share and just the overall receptions for Deontay Johnson will be higher. I'd rather have Adam Thielen, though, because you talk about that touchdown rate, how it's been relatively consistent. That might come back a little bit. And if the defense is better on Minnesota this year with Zimmer, like, that they're just going to run the ball more because that's what they do. But almost like Devontae Adams in the Packers discussion, they have set red zone plays for Adam Thielen. They're like, throw a pick, quick slant. Like, those are designed plays for him inside the 5-yard line.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned that ADP. I'm looking at FFPC ADP right now for their championship, like the bigger championship. And, he's wide receiver 24. It's pick 63. I mean, we're talking into the 6th round now, and I am someone that really likes to hammer wide receivers, especially managed redraft in those rounds. And to get Thielen as possibly your 4th wide receiver, like, that's a ton of upside. There's a lot of targets to be had there. So I do like him. You mentioned though that, maybe they might run a little bit more. They might not run as many plays just because the defense might be better. So there's a little bit of concern there with that. But I think Thielen, again, it's like the math still checks out. I get a little worried on Jefferson, as good as he is, over like I think I take Metcalf over Jefferson. I just think there's a little bit more, juice to squeeze there, just because he needs to run crazy efficiency to get there. I still have him a top 10 wide receiver, but more towards that back end of the top 10.
So yeah, do you think it's more likely he finishes as wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 22?
Wide receiver 22, I guess.
Yes.
Oh man.
I
love Jefferson. But
I like him too, but did he overachieve last season, especially fantasy-wise? Or is he just the dominant one here?
Maybe a little bit of both. I had a tweet last year looking at Justin Jefferson, and players with his yards per catch and downfield ability generally don't have the highest of catch rates because, it's a higher ADOT type role and you're sacrificing some of that consistency for the big play. And he caught 70% of his passes, which is insane. So, there's 2 ways to look at that. It's 1, this guy's amazing. And it's 2, this guy's playing over his head and it's going to regress. So generally the truth is a little bit in the middle there. I like him top 10. I think he's fine, but yeah, I do think there are other guys that might have a little bit of a higher ceiling. We shouldn't underestimate, though, a year 2 receiver that just had this amazing year, making a big leap in target share. Like, what this offense is concentrated and what instead of being like 26-24 on the target share with Thielen, what if it's like 30-20? Like, that type of thing could happen. So I do still think there's upside So that question you posed to me is a pretty difficult one to answer.
Like, I have it right now as 27 and 21. So 27 for Jefferson, 21 for Thielen, which would make Justin Jefferson wide receiver 7 by the projection. So if he gets up to that 30% level, which is within the range of outcomes, most definitely. I just don't see that happening in this offense. And if it does get up to like a 30% target share, I would feel like that means they're just not throwing a lot.
Yeah, and the efficiency probably would dip a little bit, but you'd take the extra targets over the efficiency. So I think he's going where he should. It's just kind of a note that there are some things I could see happening where, yeah, I'm taking Ridley over him, which I think is pretty much consensus now post Julio trade. So nothing too hot there, but I am taking DK Metcalf over him. And I do think, we talked about Michael Thomas already, like Michael Thomas versus Justin Jefferson in a full PPR league, like the DraftKings setup. I think it's at least close.
What about someone like Keenan Allen then in a full point PPR?
Yeah. I'm looking at our ranks now. We actually do have Keenan Allen a little bit ahead of Justin Jefferson in the full PPR ranks. I think in the half PPR ranks, the efficiency sways back to Jefferson. That one, man, I'm struggling with this Chargers offense where I think they're going to run a lot less plays than last year. They just ran so many plays. It's a new coaching staff, but at the same time,
they should run.
It's a guy that can command.
They should run better plays.
Yeah, they should run better plays. It's a guy who can command a high target share. They might pass, like their pass attempts might not end up changing a lot because they didn't trust Herbert at first even though he was playing well. It kind of took them over the course of the year to start passing a little bit more aggressively. And I mean, if Herbert's just really good, there's nothing stopping Keenan Allen from getting a ton of targets. But there's a little stuff with Eckler too. When Eckler came back, like the target share wasn't as high. And I don't know. This is all to say, like, he's one of the guys I'm struggling with. He's like a better version of Adam Thielen for me in some ways, where the math really checks out for him, but I find myself gravitating towards some of the other players. But once you get to wide receiver 10, I'm taking Keenan.
Well, in high stakes drafts, Justin Jefferson is going as the 7th receiver, pick number 24. So he's on the tier with Ridley, Metcalf, AJ Brown. That's sort of that tier of wide receiver. I would think in my mind, Jefferson and Brown might be right in the right order, but they're closer to the next tier of wide receiver that are getting drafted, which is Keenan Allen, Michael Thomas, McLaurin, and Allen Robinson. I think that all of those guys are pretty similar to me when I think about how they score their fantasy points.
Yeah, I'm taking AJ Brown over Jefferson. I feel pretty strongly about that. I think, we talk about players that rely on efficiency, but we've seen AJ Brown do it in so many different ways over a couple of seasons now. And it's a Tennessee team that has to throw a little bit more. Like, I think I have a firm tier ending after AJ Brown. Like, I think there's a top 6 wide receivers, and then it goes to like Keenan, Metcalf, Jefferson, Michael Thomas. Like, those 4 guys are pretty close to me.
How dare you not have Terry McLaurin as a part of that tier? He has Ryan Fitzpatrick now. Your favorite, the Fitzmagic.
I know. I do like McLaurin. I did move him up recently to where he's like the top of that next tier, but I don't know if the play calling is going to trend like it did for Fitzpatrick in some of his recent spots where he's been really fantasy friendly, because the defense is so good. I think it just may be a little bit more of a conservative approach. And I think McLaurin's really good. I think he's fine. I'm not going to bash McLaurin, but I do think he's behind those guys. Like, I do think there's a teardrop after wide receiver 10. And then it's like A-Rob, McLaurin, Dallas guys.
Yeah. And Dallas guys are just, I've just we went over this on the NFC East show, but just give me Gallup and hopefully he's the wide receiver too. Because you can get him.
I love them all. Give them all to me.
You're going to take Dak and all the Dallas receivers and that's just your team?
I think I was so in on Dallas last year and it was happening, dude. Like, I think there's they weren't even that concentrated of an offense, which is crazy. And these guys were still getting there. Like, if they're a little bit more concentrated, if Dak's healthy for the whole year, I don't know. I think it could be I think Dak Prescott could be drafted as the number 1 quarterback next year. I think that's in the range of outcomes where we're seeing that happen next fantasy season.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I mean, he's being drafted kind of that way right now, but he's on that like Lamar tier after Mahomes and Allen, and then you have like the next few guys. But I mean, people see that path that you see as well. That's why they're reaching on him. It's funny because Herbert's being drafted around there too, and I don't see that path for Herbert. That was a big part of our AFC West discussion with Justin Herbert and quarterbacks. Like, he's being drafted as quarterback number 6. That feels like what his upside is.
Yeah, again, I think my projections on the Chargers are a little hot. I have him QB6, but I really tend to agree with you that I definitely think there's a distinction in upside between him and the 5 quarterbacks ahead of him, like a pretty clear distinction. And I'm honestly not sure if I would take him over Russ.
I wouldn't. I would take Russ, and frankly, I wouldn't take Herbert over Hurts, but I'm far more likely to draft Hurts because Hurts is one of the quarterbacks who we could be drafting as quarterback number 1 next year. He might be not drafted next year, but his path to becoming QB1 is there.
Yeah, the Hurts value 2 rounds later, like Hurts in 8 is better than Herbert in 6.
Yeah. So the rest of these receivers, you have BC Johnson, Blake Prohl. Is that Ricky Prohl's brother? Good God, I'm old. And then you have Amir Smith, Alanis Marset. We don't want any of these guys. Even if one of the 2 were to go down, you probably still wouldn't want any of these guys. Because I've played the Chad Beebe.
Yeah, there's nothing here. I mean, I'm out. I don't know if I have another guy above like a 7% target share with knowing what we know now, outside of the receivers Irv Smith and Dalvin. Like this is a concentrated offense. And it's not like if Thielen or Jefferson goes down, one of these guys is going to start seeing 20% targets. Like,
no, what they would probably do is just start playing more 2 tight end sets with Irv and Conklin.
Yeah. It's like, that's very reasonable. Conklin saw a surprising amount of targets when Rudolph was out last year. I think he might have even like out targeted Irv. Not that we're expecting that by any stretch this year, but dude, yeah, it's brutal. Like this is just all to say that it's not the setup you want. A run heavy offense. Like there's nobody I'm interested in here. I'll keep an eye on Smith Marset just because I'm keeping an eye on basically any rookie with a pulse, but I'm not drafting him.
They do have a wide receiver named Whoop Filior, which would just be amazing if he could be good, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be good. Let's talk Dalvin Cook. Why running back 2? Running back 3? Where you got him?
Clear running back 2 for me. I slightly tilted last year.
Hold on. What differentiates him from Saquon?
Well, you don't have the injury concerns.
You don't? Start. Isn't Cook like always hurt every year for like periods of time?
I think he's entering the year healthy, and that's more important to me than the past injury history. Like Saquon, they're already talking about him being eased in, and I don't know how much I buy it, but it's enough that there's a difference for me. And I think it's a more efficient offense in terms of per play success. And I think the touchdowns are going to be more concentrated onto Dalvin, Jefferson, Thielen, versus there's a little bit more there for the Giants. I mean, I like Saquon, so we're splitting hairs here a little bit, but we've seen kind of.
I mean, it's one thing to split hairs between Thielen and some of the guys he's around, Jefferson, some of the guys he's around, because they might be gone by the time you get there. But a real decision needs to be made if you're picking second or third nitpicking between these guys. Like that is a very important decision.
For me, it's Like I had Dalvin 2 last year in my projections before like the holdout concerns and baking in that risk, and then he did basically everything that I hoped that he would do. He's going to see a team's target share. He's got huge efficiency. He's going to dominate the rush attempts. I'm really high on Dalvin. I feel more confident in him than I do in Saquon, as good as Saquon is.
Okay. Is there any other running backs as a part of that? Because, I mean, we're talking about running backs that could finish running back 1. Now, obviously, someone we're not even thinking of could finish as running back 1 if guys get hurt like they did last year. But I feel like McCaffrey's pretty cut and dry number 1. That shouldn't even be close to me, like they Cook, Henry, all of these guys, along with Cook, even Kamara, you can probably throw into that mix, can all challenge to be the running back one. But when I look at the situation and how these players are used, McCaffrey, I just think is the safest of all of them, and he has the highest upside. That's why he's number one. Then it becomes the discussion at number two. I'm curious. You said that you were running the Chargers hot in terms of your projections. I tried to be a bit more conservative, and it still gives me Austin Eckler as number 5 at running back. Could he be running back 1 if he's used in a certain way?
I'm just really concerned he's not going to have the goal line role to quite get to running back 1. He obviously could run hot on touchdowns from outside the red zone. And it's not like we don't know how they're going to use him, but I'd be surprised if he was their primary goal line back. I think he'll get some of those carries. I think he'll get some play inside the 10, but like the 2, 3, 1 yard line type plays, I think likely go elsewhere to a bigger back. I don't think he's got the overall RB1 upside. Like I think Aaron Jones has that more than Austin Eckler. I could be wrong on that.
So like Jones, Saquon, and Zeke, and even Cam Akers, if everything breaks right for him and he gets used in the passing game, those would be guys. And I would even throw Najee Harris in there. Like he could be running back 1. I don't think he's going to be running back 1, but just based on usage, passing game, and goal line, Eckler would be on the outside looking, and kind of like Kamara a little bit.
But Eckler's really safe. Like, I mean, he catches so many balls that I'm not necessarily drafting him behind all these guys. But if you're just talking like purely odds of being the overall RB1, I would throw Joe Mixon's hat in the ring.
That's interesting. Joe Mixon. We talked about him on yesterday's show, how it does seem like no one wants to draft Joe Mixon anymore, and he's sometimes falling to the 3rd round.
Giovanni Bernard is gone. There's no one behind him. And I think I saw like last year in like PPR points per game, he was like half a point behind Jonathan Taylor or something. And some of that skewed because Taylor he had a role actually pretty quickly right out of the gate. But I mean, the ability for a 3-down role, and this Bengals team has always been really bad, and they project to be bad again in terms of their win total. Even their average team total for this season is one of the lower ones in the league. But I do think if Joe Burrow turns out to be really good, and this line isn't going to be good, but it should be less of a disaster than it was last year, I just see a lot of routes towards Mixon compiling a ton of fantasy points. I mean, he can low like a 10% target share, basically all the carries, and a really good red zone role.
Is Alexander Mattison one of the elite handcuffs, or is he just a guy not to draft if you're, let's say, a 16-round, 12-team league? Like you just don't even want him anymore because we've seen what he does as a starter, and it's not even all the work.
I think he's got a decent amount of upside, though. I mean, he had didn't he have some pretty high touch games? And we saw Mike Boone with some high touch games that like could have been Alexander Mattison if Mattison was healthy. So I do think he's one of the better handcuffs where I actually feel confident that it'd be a pretty valuable role that he'd be stepping into. You know, it's not going to be all Dalvin Cook. He's not going to be even maybe 90% Dalvin Cook, but I did take him as a late upside swing on a team that I just drafted recently. I think he's worth stashing in leagues and just kind of seeing how things play out. It's the type of guy that you're rotating through your roster anyways. You know, something happens to Dalvin in the offseason, like you've hit an absolute home run with Madison. But if you're playing in like a standard league, like you're taking Alexander Mattison over like JD McKissick, right? Like what's JD McKissick going to do for you in like your average 12-team league? You know, he could help you out in maybe some best ball situations where you just need the usable pass catching weeks. But in general, I'm trying to stash these really high upside backs and just rotate through them based on how the waiver wire looks and how depth charts are shaking out.
I don't know much about McKissick this year, but McKissick is someone I rode last year in like 12-team leagues because I essentially played 0 RB, and he was the perfect running back too in full point PPR, where he just gave you that base every single week. Plus he had upside to go along with it because he started catching like 12 balls a game, something crazy like that. I don't know if that happens as much this year, but I'm not scared of that type of player. I think it depends on how your team is actually constructed, where if injuries happen and it's not to Dalvin Cook, like Madison is useless if Cook is playing. Like I never want to play him. That's kind of why I like Latavius Murray all of the time, because I never feel the need to play Latavius Murray if Kamara is playing. I just never play him. And he might have good weeks. That's fine. He can be on my bench for it. But those 3 to 4 weeks that I can get out of Murray if Kamara goes down are like top 5 running back weeks. And I just don't think that Madison is on that level. I think he's a step or two back from that, where he's a mid running back 2 if Cook isn't playing.
I think he's like on the RB1 fringe, but I do think maybe a better way of phrasing it, like, because that is a good point on McKissick and how you wrote him last year, is I like mixing the type of backs I have, and it sort of depends how I'm constructed. If I have a lot of early RB capital invested, then someone like JD McKissick's useless to me because I'm never starting him over these top guys, right? Like I kind of want someone on my bench that has like this crazy upside because I've already got guys to fill my starters. If I'm drafting a 0 RB team, you do need a couple guys like McKissick where you can say, I'm starting him week 1. I got to fill these points, and that'll buy time for some of the other upside stashes on my team to hopefully come to fruition and work out. And then at that point, maybe I use McKissick, maybe I don't.
Is JD McKissick the most Pat Mayo player of all time?
Dude, you love your pass catching backs. I mean, he's also on Washington where Chris Thompson, so maybe he's overtaken the reign from Chris Thompson as your, de facto pass catching loving running back. I'm excited to do a DK show with you this year where you tout like some like 4 or 5 $3,900 priced players that might catch 5 balls and get to 12 DraftKings points.
It's funny because I did that with Jordan Howard last year, who's sort of the anti-Pat Mayo player, but he was so cheap one week. I think it was against Arizona. And had he have just had like 4 more yards, I actually would have won the Pat Mayo Experience like Listeners League. So that would have been worth like $10K. That would have been awesome. But he couldn't get there for me. I needed a McKissick type who was just going to pile up 6 catches.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the pass, but you do love the pass catching running backs. I think that no one's going to take that title from you.
Well, that's good. That and my like Ted Gins of the world. 4 targets. Like Valdez Scantling is someone I play every single week. And for 3 weeks a year, it's great.
We need to get you on the better volume players, Pat. I think the more well-rounded volume players.
Yeah, but you have to understand. I don't like mid-range players. I like good players and bad players, and this is the only way I can afford all of the good players.
That might be a leak, though. That might be a leak in the game, in the process, Mayo. But I do think for best, this is like a kind of a good tangential point to best ball, where I think people sometimes make the mistake of drafting guys like MVS because they're like, oh, he's going to catch a couple long touchdowns and I'll use those weeks, versus like I'd almost rather have a guy with a more stable role and a better role that seems more boring. Sometimes some of these slot receivers like actually have a little bit more upside than you think. And they also can fill in weeks that the rest of your roster tanks. And, oh, hey, that 5 for 50 from slot player Y was actually useful while I've got this 1 for 20 from Marquez Valdez-Scantling on my bench.
Irv Smith became a thing for a little bit in fantasy. Like, oh my God, Irv Smith breakout season. It hasn't completely gone away. I actually just worry that Conklin just eats into him too much, that he's super viable. Like he's worse than Tunyon, but he's on like around that level.
I think he's in the Tunyon range. I think that's about right. I think I've got like after Gesicki, kind of Tunyon, Irv Smith, and the New England guys like in this tier where I don't feel great about any of them.
Yeah, not a priority essentially.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I do think Irv of those guys has the most upside though.
Well, what about someone who we're going to talk about with the next team and like Cole Kmet? Like what's really the difference?
I guess maybe just a little bit that we feel a little bit better about it, quite frankly, just because we've seen it for some weeks. But yeah. I do find it interesting with Kmet. I hope I'm not jumping the gun too much, but we don't expect rookie tight ends to perform that well. Like historically, we know they're not going to perform that well. And Kmet over the course of the season carved out a role by the end of the year where he was playing a lot more than Jimmy Graham. And yet it's like there's less hype on Kmet this year than last year, which seems a little weird to me, right? Like we kind of should have known that it wasn't going to go great year 1. So I do think we may be undervaluing Cole Kmet.
Let's move to the Bears. Their win total is 7.5 plus 180 to win the division, plus 350 Plus 180 to make the playoffs, plus 350 to win the division, 22-1 to win the conference, 50-1 to win the Super Bowl. Nagy keeps saying that Andy Dalton is going to start week 1, and maybe he does, but I don't think he's going to be starting week 2.
I'm very high on Justin Fields. In general, Justin Fields and Trey Lance are two guys that, honestly, I think you can build your draft plans around trying to maximize their upside, where if these guys are playing, they have top 10 quarterback upside, and the rest of your league isn't going to draft them anywhere near that because they might not be starting week 1. Now, it's going to cost you a bench spot because you're going to have to start with 2 QBs right off the bat. But in a casual league, if I can get Fields and Trey Lance in rounds 13 to 14, like there's some quarterbacks for free. We talked about Kirk Cousins. Heck, I mean, you can take him for free at the end of the draft. Someone like Tua, you can complement these guys with. My best ball strategy and my managed strategy revolves heavily around the fact that I could potentially get a Justin or a Jalen Hurts type player 5 rounds later and then have better skill players than you and just roll the dice on how long it takes for that to come to fruition.
Like, there's an entire midsection of these quarterbacks that are being drafted. Essentially, like Watson is going at 15, and we just don't know anything about him. So let's just kind of throw him out of the conversation. That starting at number 13, quarterback 13, it's Stafford. So it's Stafford, Ryan, Watson, Trevor Lawrence, Ben Roethlisberger, Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins, Carson Wentz. Those are the guys going in between Burrow and Fields right now. I'd rather have Trevor Lawrence just because of the rushing ability that he brings too, and I know that he's going to be starting week 1. But other than that, Fields would be the guy after that for me, even if he doesn't start till week 4. I'd rather have him than Baker Mayfield.
Right, like just roll with the upside, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're at a certain point in a one quarterback league, the functional points scored of Baker, and I like Baker this year, but the difference between him and, like, let's even just say like Zach Wilson, right? Like, Daniel Jones, whoever, like, what's the real difference there? It's very minimal. Or Jameis, if he ends up like, the difference is so small. Whereas if Fields, if Lance, if Lawrence really hit, the difference actually becomes meaningful.
And the way that you need to think about it, I think this is what you were kind of alluding to, is that who scores more points? Like I always try to think of the positions on my fantasy team as what are the amount of points that I'm generating from that position. So if it's, let's say, 13 weeks of Justin Fields and 4 weeks of Kirk Cousins or 4 weeks of Sam Darnold, is that going to outscore Matt Ryan or Ben Roethlisberger? And I think that it would.
And there's more of a priority on the playoff weeks too, right? Like, so even in a vacuum, if you're scoring a similar amount of points, you've got more upside come playoff time, and it's not like you need to be top in your league to make the playoffs. You've just got to be the top 30% or so, depending on however your league playoffs work.
I find
50%.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the league settings that you have. I find David Montgomery to be one of the more interesting players in fantasy drafts this year because the expectation, to me at least, was going to be, with the way that he finished the season, that he would end up going inside the top 10 running backs because enough people would talk themselves into him. But the opposite has actually happened, where he's just going exactly where he went last year, despite, everyone saw the soft schedule coming, but he did it. And as soon as Cohen went down, he was awesome as a fantasy asset to have. And now Cohen is coming back. Damian Williams is a part of this roster as well. But are we just overlooking the fact that maybe David Montgomery is just a good running back on this team now?
I don't know. I think it's kind of a falling grenade, and I don't really want to be the one to jump on it.
No one wants to be the one to jump on it, and that's causing him to go in like the end of the 4th, 5th round.
So positionally, I think he's going about right, where people haven't overreacted, and as a result, he's not overvalued within the running back group. He's going about where he should relative to other running backs. I'm just rarely taking running backs in the 4th, 5th round. Like, I am hammering receivers there. And with Montgomery, I'm really worried that, it's not only do you have Tariq Cohen, but like maybe I'm overvaluing the acquisition of Damian Williams, who I think's actually pretty decent and someone I've been taking at the very back end of drafts, where I think he can cut into Montgomery like a little bit everywhere. Tariq's going to cut into obviously the targets that Montgomery had, but it was just a perfect storm for Montgomery. Not only, and the soft schedule, and we do have to give him credit for, like, even though it was a soft schedule, he was still amazing. Like, he still performed more than he should have. But the combination of the soft schedule with he took every running back snap imaginable because they had absolutely nothing behind him. Even if Tree Cohen gets hurt again, it's not the upside case from last season with Damian Williams there.
All right. So he's just falling in that dead range with Chris Carson and Josh Jacobs that you're just not going after.
Yeah, I think Carson's like okay, actually. Like, yeah, but yeah, like him, like Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery. I think it's like we're kind of nitpicking the value there. And when we like zoom out and we look at functionally, like, how much is this going to help my fantasy team? I don't know if the upside's worth the risk that a lot of these running backs just have there just by the nature of the position.
We've already spoken about Allen Robinson very briefly, about how he's inside the top 15 receivers for sure. He could be a top 10 receiver. It depends on what kind of draft you're in. And do you worry about him with Fields at all? Because I feel like Dalton is going to be really good for Allen Robinson. If he was just to start 17 games, it would just be, hey, I'll throw it to Allen Robinson. That's our play when we pass. With Fields, where he is going to be taking off running a little bit more, I just worry about that the overall passing volume will just be down for this team across the board.
I'm not too worried about it. Fields was extremely accurate in college. A lot of sharp people thought, honestly, he should have been in contention or maybe even the favored quarterback to go after Trevor Lawrence. And I know that didn't happen. He went QB4. He went meaningfully later than Lance, than Zach Wilson. But I'm treating him as if he's like a top 5 pick. And
okay. Well, I guess let me rephrase this.
But then I think he's good.
Maybe I said this wrong though, because that he's good. Like, Dalton is bad now. So I feel like he's just going to lock on to his best player and just keep throwing to him. Fields, if he's better, maybe he has some more progressions where he can look down the field and gets more people involved. I feel like the target share will be higher for Allen Robinson if Dalton is the quarterback.
It may be, but I do think we sometimes overlook the systemic risk of a bad quarterback and the systemic upside of a good quarterback, what that can do just for the offense as a whole, where, I kind of would take Allen Robinson with a 25% target share with Justin Fields more than I would take him with, a 28, 29% target share with Andy Dalton. Like, give me Fields. Let's hope this offense runs more plays. Let's hope they're more efficient. There's more touchdowns. The catch rate for Allen Robinson is higher than it would have been with Dalton. The yards per catch is higher. So I still think it's a plus if Fields is in there over Dalton. Like, if Fields is good, I think we're still very happy, even if he's going to, I don't even think like Allen Robinson's going to command a wide receiver 1 target share, whoever the quarterback is. You are going to lose some overall pass attempts with some more rushing from Fields, but I don't think it's enough that you're rooting for Dalton to be the starter here over the course of the season.
Okay. So then you have Anthony Miller, Darnell Mooney, Marquise Goodwin's on this team. Who else? Javon Wims, Demir Bird is on this team. He's going to end up playing a role for a few weeks because he always just finds a way to wedge in there and get on the field. Very good special teams player. So that usually gets him in uniform. Then all of a sudden it's like, hey, we need a guy who's super fast to run down the field. They have like 3 of those guys who were like at wide receiver 4, 5, and 6. But do you have a lean between Miller and Mooney, or are they just both guys that you probably don't want?
Because I'm taking a lot of Fields, if I'm playing best ball leagues where I'm more cognizant of stacking, I think they're viable. Mooney's interesting in that he started to carve out a pretty big role and a really high ADOT, but like Trubisky and Foles, like they just could not get him the ball down the field. And I think that season with some more accurate passing, maybe, like, we could be looking at it as a very different type of season if the downfield passing's there. What's tough is, the market is still like kind of on Mooney. So he's like fine for me where he's going. It does seem like everyone's completely written off Anthony Miller, and I've gotten him basically for free at the very end of drafts. And I'm kind of fine doing that. Like, I don't have crazy expectations, but it can get pretty thin sometimes in these best ball leagues in rounds 16 through 20 on DraftKings. And Miller is one of the guys that I'm willing to take there.
Jimmy Graham and Cole Kmet. We talked about Kmet a little bit. Is Jimmy Graham's presence enough to hurt Kmet though? And that makes him not viable.
Yeah, I mean, it hurts Komet. The way they use Jimmy Graham by the goal line, I don't know if that's changing. I think we have a changing of the guard clearly in terms of the overall snap rate, who's going to see more targets, and it's trending Komet's way. And I like that. I think it's enough to make him a top 20 tight end. But yeah, I mean, we'd certainly rather Jimmy Graham not be there. And then maybe some of those goal line plays go just more directly to Komet than they do to Graham. And Graham, like, as old as he is, does seem to do pretty well in that role. So it's hard to, knock them too much for doing it that way.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but he used to play basketball, so he's pretty athletic.
Posting up in the end zone. Did you know Antonio Gates played basketball too?
I had not heard that. No, that is new news to me. Let's move to the Lions. Get this over with.
Oof.
Their win total is 5. 6-1 to make the playoffs, 20-1 to win the division, 66-1 to win the NFC, 151 to win the Super Bowl. Are they the leading contenders besides Houston, maybe, for the first pick?
I think so. I mean, they seem really bad. The way their coaches, Campbell, is going about things too isn't exactly a process that instills a lot of confidence in you. They're the type of team I could see playing in a negative game script a lot, but not playing as if they're in a negative game script.
That is it's funny because when I put in my projected rushing rate for the Lions, like when I did the Bengals, I had them at like a 38% rushing rate because if they get behind, they're just going to throw. They're not even going to try to run. And with the Lions, I actually have them at a 47% rush rate, which doesn't seem like it makes any sense, but it makes sense for Dan Campbell.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have them quite that high, but I'm with you. Like relative to what their pass rate should be, it's going to be very low. And it's tough. There's that conversation of like, do you just avoid offenses like this, or is there opportunity because no one wants to draft these guys? The depth chart stinks, so there's room for guys to grow. So they are an interesting team from a fantasy perspective because. And it's tough to weight that against, again, the systemic risk of the team. The offense is being really bad, but DeAndre Swift on a good team would be going very, very early. And now he's starting to slip.
So,
into the third round, maybe even to the back end of the third round. And TJ Hawkinson is one of the tight ends that you can take after the top 3 or 4 guys that actually has meaningful upside because he could lead the team in targets and he's actually good. So, and then as far as receivers go, you're not excited by anyone, but Rashad Perriman and Tyrell Williams are going wide receiver 70 plus, and one of them's going to have some value. And that's more of a best ball thing where I don't think they have these huge ceilings, but if you can get the wide receiver 1 on a team as your 8th wide receiver in best ball, like that's really good, even if the team stinks.
So let's talk through these guys. Goff, any interest whatsoever?
So Goff, I have no interest in. I just don't see any upside here. I have zero interest in Goff. I know my friend Anthony Amico, who does our dynasty stuff at ETR, he kind of likes Goff a little bit, but man, the combination of going from McVay to Campbell, the Rams receivers to the Lions receivers, there's no rushing upside. I just don't see it. Like, what's the best case? He's QB 18. And like, do I really care if he's QB 18 instead of QB 29? No, I don't care.
Okay. Running backs. You mentioned DeAndre Swift, and he might slip down into the third round. People are kind of he's actually trending a lot like Joe Mixon, which is really weird because Mixon's in such a better spot, at least in my mind. The biggest thorn here is I think they're going to use a lot of Jamal Williams. Like, I don't want to draft DeAndre Swift where he's still going.
Yeah, it's like Swift. People overreacted to the Anthony Lynn comment about Jamal Williams where they viewed him as an A-back. And Swift really started to drop. I'm looking at our updated ADPs as of today, and it does look like some of that's like leveled off and you aren't getting the discount as much. If he falls to the 3-4 turn, like I'm very interested. I think this is one of the few running backs in this range that has legitimate upside because he's a really talented player. And I think he could get peppered with targets. I mean, I have a pretty conservative target share on him. And Jack Miller was, giving me a little bit of trouble because I only had like targets in the 50s for DeAndre Swift. And a lot of projection systems have him catching 50 plus balls. I know Mike Clay.
I do as well. I have him catching 52 balls.
So it's hard for him to be bad if he's going to catch 50 plus balls, right? Like
Well,
even if Jamal Williams is involved, if you're as talented as DeAndre Swift, and I don't know, am I overrating that talent? Like that's possible, but I don't think he's going to carry the ball less than Jamal Williams.
No.
And if I'm getting 50 catches and a split rush roll from like a young dynamic running back on a team that we mentioned, like they're going to run the ball more than they should anyways. They're probably going to run the ball a lot by the goal line. I still think there's upside here. I don't think it's a smash, but he's at least interesting in the third round.
So I have him as running back 14 in PPR when the projections run everything out. I think in reality, when I do my rankings, that he's going to be lower than that, because I feel like you're even at running back 14, which is right around where he's being drafted right now. That's sort of his push value. Like, I don't know how much upside there is in this offense. And I gave him 50% of the carries. I gave him a 12% of the market share. You have to remember too, that like Jamal Williams is such a good blocker that is just going to get him on the field in a lot of passing down situations. You feel like that's one of the main reasons that he was brought in. And then knowing this team, they're going to use like two other guys that we haven't even heard of yet.
Yeah. I mean, I have him RB16. So we view him similarly. I do think there's, as bad as the team is, there's like an upside case here that, there might not be for some of the other like late third round running backs, but it would have to be late third round because we already hit on like at the turn, Metcalf, Jefferson, Michael Thomas, like those guys are amazing, right? Like, I don't think I'm passing on a receiver like that or even an elite tight end for Swift. Like Swift would have to come after the elite tight ends, would have to come after that tier of wide receivers. And then even then it's like DeAndre Swift versus like McLaurin, Robinson, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb. Like even then it is tough. So
right now, since June 1st in high stakes leagues, Swift is going at pick number 25. And that puts him firmly in the running back tier with Clyde Edwards-Helaire and J.K. Dobbins. Those three guys are all being drafted around each other. He would be last of those three to me. And I don't love Dobbins.
I have him well above Dobbins. I'm a J.K. Dobbins hater. I call him the silent fantasy team killer. I think he's going to have a fine season at a really high opportunity cost, and he just does not have the super high end outcomes because he's gonna split carries no matter what, and he's not gonna catch passes.
Well, he's gonna split carries three ways is the problem.
Right, Lamar, him, and Gus. Like Gus Edwards, like J.K. Dobbins was awesome last year. He's gonna be awesome again this year in real life, but Gus Edwards was third in the league in rush yards over expectation per attempt. Like Gus Edwards is good too. They're going to use him no matter how you feel about the Gus bus. It's happening.
Yeah. Like I just think that Edwards-Helaire of those three guys I don't know if I would take him there, but based on everything that we've talked about, like if you're mining for gold in this range, like the path for Clyde Edwards-Helaire to be a much better running back than this of those three guys, it's just so much higher.
Yeah, you're taking CEH kind of hands down, I think, over those guys right now. And, maybe before the Jamal Williams nonsense, I would have said Swift was right there with him, maybe even ahead of him. But I think I have it pretty clear. Like, I would definitely take CEH first of that group. I would definitely take Swift second, and I would definitely take Dobbins third.
Yeah, and for me, when I look at this team, it's going to be Hawkinson, or I'm probably going to pick one of these receivers and hope to pick right. That they end up with like the 35% market share somehow because the team's no good, and that's sort of the case. And let's talk about who it could be, because you have Perriman, Tyrell Williams, Quintez Cephas, one of the better names that's out there. Geronimo Allison's on this team. Khalif Raymond, who we've last seen with the Tennessee Titans. Tom Kennedy, the Rattler, Damian Ratley. And then you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who just seems like the very logical choice here. He's going to run shallower routes. He just seems to fit with Jared Goff. His game fits with Jared Goff's game, where that could be like 100 catches.
Yeah, I have a tough time here because generally I'm leaning towards the rookies in these spots, and that is St. Brown, but I feel like he's a little bit overhyped relative to the rest of the guys. Like
where's he going though? They're all going past pick like 70 wide receiver.
Yeah, I know. I think Perriman could be the wide, I don't know. I like the upside of Perriman a little bit better.
But if you like the upside of Perriman, then I think you have to like the upside of Goff as well. Like, you really think that Goff's going to be hitting Perriman in stride down the field 50 yards? No, he's going to be dumping it off to St. Brown 2 yards in front of him.
I mean, Goff's got an arm. Like he can get the ball to guys. It's not like he's totally dysfunctional. Like, it's not like it's the Washington offense we saw where, and even McLaurin still managed to thrive, but like he has some capabilities as a quarterback, even if we think he's a bad real life quarterback. Like he has the arm to make big plays and to get the ball to guys. So I don't know. I'm taking Perriman of this group, but yeah, it's like you can roll the dice on any of them. They're all fine in best ball because getting
we
receiver
we have a saying on the show, Mike. Everyone's a good best ball pick.
Better in best ball. But I guess what I mean by that is if I'm in a managed league, I don't think any of them have the type of upside that I really want to stash on my bench.
Yeah, I think that if things break right for St. Brown, that he could be the player in this offense who just averages like 12 targets a week. And that might lead to 7 for 63, but that has value to me for a last round pick.
Yeah. But that is better in best ball because you kind of want those usable weeks like piled on each other. Whereas you're never going to start that in your starting lineup in a managed league. Like, whereas Perriman has some outcomes where like maybe you would start him, right? Like if Perriman's a 25% target share guy, you're starting him, even if the offense stinks.
But here's the thing. Perriman's been good for like 4 games in his career with Jameis, who was chucking the ball 61 times a game. That's it.
Hey, those were a good 4 games, and we've got a 99th percentile speed score that we're going to hang on to for the rest of our damn lives, okay?
You just pair him up. You know what? You can draft him, and you can draft Drew Bennett. You can pull Billy Volek out of retirement. You'll be good to go.
Maybe we can get, who is the receiver? Davis had this receiver for the Stephen Hill for the Jets.
Oh, yeah. Second round pick.
We get second round pick, Stephen Hill. Hey, Perriman, first round pick, so.
He was good. Well worth the first round pick.
That turned out well.
Yeah, it was great. Great news for them. Hawkinson. Would you rather have Hawkinson or Andrews?
I would rather have Andrews and hope that Baltimore throws a little bit more and just scores a ton of points. And Andrews was still like fine last year. And I felt like things went about as bad as they could. Like the offense wasn't as sharp as it should have been. I feel like every week I was watching Andrews drop a touchdown pass. I don't know. I think the upside's a little bit more for Andrews. If you're playing more full PPR or even like the tight end premium leagues, like Hawkinson's a little more interesting where like he could just get peppered with targets from Goff and they're not super high value targets. But if you're in tight end premium and you're catching 6 balls a week, like you're going to have really good scores. And you're going to start to separate yourself from the mid-tier tight ends by a decent bit. So in general, though, I'm more into taking tight ends early in best ball because I think structurally it helps you do a lot of things that are really valuable. And it's hard to make up for tight end points with quantity. In a managed league, the opportunity cost is so high. I'm kind of with you where like all these guys don't have that great of floors. Like Hawkinson and Andrews do have a little bit more floor of the guys after them, but in general, I think these guys get overdrafted in managed leagues where I'm really just trying to absolutely crush people at wide receiver and flex. And I want to stockpile as many of the guys that can help me do that as possible in this range.
Would you rather have Pitts or Hawkinson? Because Pitts is going ahead of Hawkinson now.
I'd rather have Pitts. Am I buying into the hype too much? I think I'd rather have Pitts. I don't even think it's close.
You don't think it's close? Really? So you don't
think it's close, like, Pat. I don't think it's close.
I mean, these guys are drafted. I don't know. Listen, I'm no college football expert, but Hawkinson had a lot of pedigree too coming out of college, as we remember.
Yeah, but not. I mean, we've never seen a tight end with a draft.
Yes, we have. His name was Vernon Davis.
Well, Vernon Davis was a monster and amazing and got ruined by Mike Singletary. Okay. So, and he was still really good. Did Vernon go that high in the draft though? I know he was.
I feel like he went 11.
He went 6. He went 6.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I feel like he was the highest drafted tight end ever when he was drafted.
Yeah, probably because Pitts is the highest at 4, but Pitts is, he'd be a really good wide receiver prospect. Not an elite one, but he'd be a really good wide receiver prospect. And I think he's entering the nut situation where they lose Julio, which opens up targets, but he's still got like protection from Calvin Ridley. He's on a team that's going to throw a ton. They're going to be bad. They have a good quarterback. They play in a dome. Like, I think it just the stars are aligning for Kyle Pitts to really break the mold of rookie tight end failures. And I would take Pitts. Yeah, I'd take Pitts ahead of Hawkinson.
He in high stakes,
Not even close. Maybe was a little dramatic.
Well, it's starting to become not even close in high stakes leagues right now. It's Kelsey pick 8, Waller pick 24, Kittle pick 32, Pitts pick 51, Hawkinson pick 65, Andrews pick 66.
It's possible that Kyle Pitts is a top 2 round pick next year. I don't know if that's possible for Hawkinson. Like, I think Hawkinson has a chance, like he's going to have a really good, really solid season, but Pitts could be the first tight end taken next year.
I agree with you, but I do think that there's significant downside with the now capital that you have to spend in order to draft him. That I don't think that, I mean, yes, the monster upside rests with Pitts versus Hawkinson, but I think you're kind of diminishing how well Hawkinson can score in this offense just through attrition every single week and the consistency that you can probably mine from him, especially in PPR formats where Pitts could just not be good year one. Because you've already alluded to it. Does he break the mold? He seems to have the talent to, but there's been a lot of talented wide receivers or tight ends year one that haven't done anything.
Yeah, it's possible. I'm like, in my mind, like I don't see it going bad. Like, I think the floor is actually there just because of the setup, but I could be wrong. And to your point about Hawkinson getting there via attrition, he was the T5 last year and was like pretty boring. Like, so Hawkinson's very unlikely to hurt you. Like, he's not going to hurt you, which is rare from tight ends in round 6 or so. You mentioned, thorn in my side, Evan Ingram, who I've drafted in the past, where like he has just been a killer. Hawkinson's probably not going to kill you.
Well, just looking, it's funny when you kind of look at the range of outcomes of where these guys are going. So you have your average pick, then you have the max pick and the min pick. So the max pick for Mark Andrews is 53. The max pick for TJ Hawkinson is 48. The max pick for Kyle Pitts, 17th.
Yeah. I mean, people are drinking the Kool-Aid. I would not take him 17th. I want to be very clear here. I'm trying to think where I would take him in like a managed non-tight end premium league. Like, it's still probably like not till like the 5-6 turn. So I'm probably not getting him. But I think like Hawkinson, Andrews, I probably wouldn't take until 7 in like a managed redraft. Does that sound about right? Or
yeah, I think so. I think that some of these higher stakes leagues put more of a premium on tight ends who actually play, so then people don't have to worry about it all the time. I'm just going to look at the CBS, and this is drawing information from like, they don't allow you to sort by like last 3 weeks in terms of drafts, that kind of thing, because, why would anyone ever want to do that? Hawkinson's going around the same spot though, around like 70 overall.
Yeah. It depends on your roster construction to that point. Like that seems fine.
Yeah. Not exciting, but
seems about right.
Not horrible at the same time. All right. Mike Leone, 2 hats, 1 mic from EstablishTheRun.com. Tell everyone once again what you got going on over there.
Yeah, it's a lot going on, getting ready for the NFL season. We brought on Anthony Amico to do dynasty stuff for that. We're updating those dynasty ranks each week. I'm behind the scenes working on our rankings, our staff rankings for every format possible, including DraftKings, Best Ball. So you can check that out. And then doing some podcasts and some content on the Establish the Run YouTube page, on the pod feed, and also running the Establish the Edge pod feed. Make sure to check that out. We've had a lot of great content. Looking forward to producing even more up to and through the duration of the NFL season.
Do you play a lot of Dynasty? Because I feel like that's for people who have too much time on their hands.
That's me. I'm one of those people. Levitan refers to us as Dynasty Virgins. So
that sounds about right.
It does sound about right. It's growing though, but it's kind of fun where like it makes the NFL draft and stuff like that more exciting, and
yeah, but
there's a little more strategy.
Here's the thing: you can just bet on the NFL draft. That makes it exciting.
I had a very good NFL draft betting season this year.
See,
betting on the NFL draft is awesome. Like,
that's what you can do.
Yeah, but I'm in New York, so it's hard for me to do that. Like, I had a friend who was in Colorado, like on vacation at the time, so he was like able to get like all the bets in. I'm pretty limited in what I can do in New York.
Well, I mean, we just passed our single sport betting law, so you can just cross the border. What does it take you? 15 minutes?
Yeah, when I can start crossing the border again.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
once we allow you crazies back in, but just buy a place in Canada.
So,
Then you won't even
I
pay
don't have
taxes
to
on your
do-
bets.
I don't have to do parlay tickets anymore.
No, single game betting is going to be. I mean, once they it passed, so it's legal now. They the provinces have to institute it, but Ontario is just like anyone who wants to buy a license can come on in. So everyone's going to be operating there soon.
Nice, love it.
So that's how we're going. So 2 hats, 1 mic on Twitter, establishtheRun.com, establish the Edge podcast. If you want to go search it, I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me at the PME, Twitter, Instagram, the Facebooks. If you're an old, you can find it up there as well. The newsletter's in the description. Smash the like on the way out. Sub to Mayo Media Network or the podcast feed for shows every single day. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
That Mayo experience. Experience.